Give us clarity. You know, the Russia-Ukraine war is another thing, but the geopolitics of crude and petroleum products, how does it trickle down to countries that are more inclined to import?
I think that in the coming weeks and months, countries that mostly rely on petroleum products are likely to face a challenge in the sense that prices have begun to shoot up because an organization called the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, which is led by Saudi Arabia, which is a major exporter of petroleum products, has decided to cut the supply of this particular product. And for that matter, rallying prices higher compared to previous weeks. And when prices of petroleum products increase on the international market, it sends a trigger on any petroleum importing country. So I think I agree with Derek when he mentioned that in our local economy, we may have to begin to think of how the pressure will come on our currency, because it means that we may need a lot of dollars to import same quantity of fuel we're importing last month or last 2 months. Inflation may also be a challenge, because when petroleum prices increases, as he mentioned, cost of production and cost of other prices of commodities, because petroleum is the engine of growth of any economy. It holds the transport sector, the communication sector, and every aspect of the economy relies on petrol. So when prices increase, it affects the price of every aspect of this economy we're talking about. So inflation, we should be expecting that inflation is likely to pick up again. Already has started picking up, which is hovering around 42% currently. We should also be seeing that there will be certain agitations and demonstrations in the economy, led by maybe some commercial, private commercial transport operators will begin to agitate that they need fair increment. And that also sends a signal to households, because when fair increment comes in, households will also suffer, especially those who don't have vehicles to commute to their workplaces will have to pay higher prices for transport via the trotro system or any other forms of transport system in the country. So anytime fuel prices increase, the households are affected, firms are affected, and government is also going to be affected, because when prices increase, based on our experience and the data we have in the country, anytime prices increase, government revenue reduces, because the purchase of fuel reduces. And when purchase of fuel reduces, based on the constant and fixed levies on petroleum products, the revenue of government also declines, as we've seen in the year 2022. So fuel on an import economy like Ghana has a lot of economic distress, or has a lot of negative impact on us. And we think that at any time as a country, we need to ensure energy security. That's why we've always been calling for having a state refinery, or having certain private refineries that will refine our own products and make sure that there's that energy security to give us buffer against any imported inflation.
Before we get to the conversation of whether we can have a domestic refinery, and even if we do, such as the state of toy is something that we can even broaden our conversation. But you said that one thing that is the engine of every economy is fuel. And what do you make of the more or less 10 or less of taxes being placed on fuel? Although you said, such as the factors, inflation and all that, are likely to increase, do you still believe that the removal of some taxes on petroleum products will necessarily help reduce the burden on these key economic movers?
Oh, surely it is. But if see, at any time there's a trade-off. At this current point in our economic and fiscal management, I think that government needs a lot of revenue. So if you ask government to scale down its revenue projection by taking off some of these taxes on fuel, I don't think government will agree, because already ESLA proceeds, for example, if you look at the 2023 budget, government in the year projected that it was going to transfer almost 3 billion Ghana cedis to ESLA, which is the PLC, but government was only able to transfer about 1 billion Ghana cedis, which is about a shortfall of about 2 billion. So it tells you that government even doesn't have revenue. Government is finding other ways to mobilize revenue to offset some of the debt in the energy sector. So calling on government to reduce taxes or to scrap some of the taxes will be challenging at this, even though we are objective that some of these taxes are nuisance and must be taken off. But calling on government to take off these taxes will be challenging for government in a period where government needs a lot of revenue to balance its expenditure and also scale down the budget deficit. So that is the problem. But I think that for us to get cheaper fuel, refining is key. For us to get cheaper fuel, I think that we need, especially BOST and Go Energy needs to hedge. For example, this year we began the year with cheaper price of fuel on the international market. If we had hedge going forward, by now at least BOST should be having almost...
How would this hedging look like?
So hedging simply means that you go, it's a risk mechanism where you project the future price of petroleum products and then tell the trader that I'll buy it at this cost even in future. That's how much I'm going to buy it. When you do your calculations and risk analysis well, it can go to your advantage or to your disadvantage. But I think in the beginning of the year, we realized that price of fuel were down, and we also realized that there were anticipation of OPEC cutting supplies of this product on the international market, which also meant that there was going to be hikes or there was going to price bullying on the fuel stock market. So when that happens, if we had hedged earlier, telling our traders that we're going to buy fuel at maybe $70 per barrel or maybe $75 per barrel, today that fuel is around $85 per barrel. In terms of metric ton, Ghana would have been achieving a lot of revenue.
Would that have been possible, considering that the Bank of Ghana is the one auctioning or supporting the inflow of money or dollars for these oil marketers to purchase from the international market?
It is, because this is an arrangement that is going to be between the BDC and the trader, right? Not actually insisting on Bank of Ghana to maybe offload some of these revenues in dollars to this particular trader. It is that I'm going to buy this product in 3 months' time at this constant price, and I'll pay you that a particular amount.
You know about the gold for oil policy?
Yes, the gold for oil policy is not a hedging policy.
But should that be something that might be under consideration?
I think
because it somehow looks like a hedge policy.
It looks, but it's not entirely a hedge policy, because I think if you look at the gold for oil policy, there is like there's a conflict in terms of the direction of this policy. Why do I say so? Earlier when we met MPA's direction was that the BDCs were going to lead it, right? And then government comes in to support these particular BDCs to import the products and pay with gold proceeds sold abroad to any gold trader abroad. But when you listen to BOST and others, they were talking of barter system, where they were going to barter the gold for oil. So that particular conflict needed to be merged. I think on 23rd February, the ministry brought a document out merging these two scenarios for us to go. But if you look at what is happening currently, and if you study the IMF report, that is the Memorandum of Understanding report between the government of Ghana, led by the Minister of Finance, and the IMF, there was a mention of the gold for oil policy, where the IMF asked the Bank of Ghana and the finance ministers to audit this particular policy, because there were certain financial malfeasance that IMF suspects that it is causing a rather debt on the books of government than getting government some revenue. So the gold for oil would have been a nice policy if we implemented it well. However, because of how we run policy implementation in our country, I think the IMF saw some red flags and called on government to audit it. So as I'm speaking with you, the gold for oil policy has been put on hold till some of these audits are done and better and efficient measures are put in place.
Since 2010, when government, or let's say Ghana, decided to go into as a net exporter or go into refinery, not necessarily refinery, but for exploration, we began to see some companies or corporations coming to the country to explore, and we've seen some barrels, some being exported outside the country. The hope subsequently was that by that time to now, TOR should be operational. And you made mention that if we had had a local refinery, these factors would necessarily will help reduce the prices at the pump in our domestic markets. Can TOR be revived? Already we've seen some even private companies entering into refinery already, Santor and some others.
Yeah, TOR can be revived. I think that it all boils down to government's commitment of reviving TOR. What are the challenges? TOR has maybe 3 challenges: a financial challenge, managerial challenge, and maybe operational challenge in terms of maybe having some of this equipment being obsolete or maybe rickety, and that means retooling of this equipment. In terms of managerial, because TOR has always been a state property or a state-owned entity, we have politicians recruiting redundant staff to this particular entity. For example, in 2018, the Seaboard published an industry report where TOR, at that particular capacity of about 45,000 barrels a day, needed only 150 employees. But as of 2018, TOR had an employee strength of about 800, and 800 because politicians bring in their people.
800 whilst there was no output from
because in 2018 TOR refined only 988,000 barrels compared to previous years where it was refining almost 1 million barrels, or even in 2020.
So you are saying TOR has the capacity?
Yes, TOR has a capacity to refine 45,000 barrels a day. That is, I've been talking about only the CDU, Central Distillation Unit, without adding the RFCC. But at that time, at that capacity level in 2018, needed only 150 employees. But in 2018, had 800 employees, excess of 650 employees, meaning politicians were bringing their cronies or children into the management of TOR. And anytime the employee strength increases, it means that your cost of remuneration or compensation will also increase. And that also burdens the managerial efficiency or the financial efficiency of TOR. So if you get a partial privatization of it, maybe we can do equity swap. Maybe you invite participants, shareholders to come in, and then you give them some equity in terms of injecting certain capital in the affairs of TOR. When you do that, these particular private persons will instill certain financial discipline, managerial discipline, because at the end of the day, they'll be expecting dividends from the proceeds of TOR, and they will not be expecting losses. So we need private-public partnership in the management of TOR. And if that is done, we solve that particular managerial problem. Then the last problem is financial problem. And if you inject private participation, finances will pick up because that private person will install or will bring in certain finances to take care of TOR. Then lastly, if you look at the price build-up carefully, most of the taxes we mentioned, especially energy debt recovery levy, has a component that goes to TOR, which annually we pay 8 pesos. And imagine a country like Ghana that is consuming almost 5 billion liters of petroleum products. Multiply that by 8 pesos. It's a huge sum of money, almost 400 million a year to TOR. If you convert that into maybe current dispensation of about 10 Ghana cedis to $1, we are talking of almost $40 million to TOR. So imagine we inject this money taken from the petroleum consumer into the operations of TOR. I think financially TOR will be stable. Then we connect TOR as a midstream or downstream entity to our upstream, where GNPC takes our oil liftings from the groups or any of the fields, then give it to TOR to refine instead of selling it abroad. So it is a whole supply chain thing that as a country, if you are committed to making sure that TOR works, it works for the good of all of us.
Financial, leadership structure,
managerial and then operational.
These are the key challenges.
Yes.
And of all these, these things cannot be dealt with.
Yes, so there are a lot of schools of thought. For example, I attended a meeting at MPA where some believe that TOR's products, right, compared to what is imported into the country. So TOR refines product at 1500 ppm. And according to them, some OMCs do not want to buy the product because consumers do not buy that particular product compared to what is imported, which is around 50 ppm. That is 50 part per million sulfur content. And my argument has been that if you look at the purchase of the hydrodesulfurization unit, it's very cheap. So if you want to convert the 1500 ppm, that's 1500 ppm sulfur content of the products from TOR, you just need a hydrodesulfurization unit to now break it down to the 50 ppm or even 10 ppm compared to what is sold.
To make it easily marketable.
Easily marketable, right? But I think politicians are not committed to making sure that it works. And if someone tells you that TOR is a redundant entity, it's not true, because as we're speaking, there are negotiations that they even want to offload TOR, rent it out to private participants to use it as a tolling or a throughput entity. So TOR can work, but politicians are not sure. They are not committed to making it work.
We are kind of closing up on this conversation, but I want to get your take on the risks associated with the whole conversation in terms of how much we owe individual power producers. I'm sure some of them probably useful to back their business, but what is the risk associated with debt to these power producers in Ghana now? If we don't take care of it, and subsequently, how will it impact our economy, our finances, and our structure?
I think the debt situation in the power sector is a very challenging one. I also think that it's a very serious matter that, if not resolved within the shortest possible time through negotiation or whatever means, within the shortest possible time, may end us into doom, so as is happened in 2015. For example, if you look at the 2023 budget, the Minister of Finance made an allocation of 23 billion to offset power sector shortfalls or power sector debt. But the first half of 2023 was able to make allocation only 5 billion Ghana cedis. I mean 23 billion Ghana cedis. And only was able to make allocation only 5 billion Ghana cedis, which means that there's an excess of about 18 billion Ghana cedis that the Minister of Finance must mobilize and then pay off these IPPs. If we are not able to pay them, it means that we need a negotiation system. We need a strong negotiation system to be able to bring them on table to understand why we are not able to pay them and renegotiate it and restructure this debt to future terms. If we're able to do that, then no doom so. But if we are not able to do that, I think that in the first quarter of 2020,